Hello, Night Owls! Welcome back to the Nocturnal Mind YouTube channel. My name is Kaylee, and if you don't know who I am, or what Nocturnal Mind is by now, do your research. Just kidding, there's a link in the description. So today, in the midst of writing, I was suddenly reminded of a piece of advice I received when I was just a little baby writer starting out. So I thought today I would share with you a few pieces of writing advice that I have received over the years that have really helped me a lot. And some of it is kind of general writing advice, but a few of them are very specific tricks that I picked up from other writers over the years. So here they are, in no particular order. 8 pieces of advice I frequently use for my writing. First and foremost, done is better than good. Now I know a lot of advice can vary from writer to writer, because every writer is unique and we each do something different in order to create. And as always, there are exceptions to the rule. But I cannot stress this enough. As someone who took 10 years to write her first novel, finish a full draft first and fix it later. This was a constant problem I had when I first started out as a writer. The main issue was my perfectionism. I believed that every writer just shot out a book that was perfect. I didn't really realize it takes a lot of extra work and multiple edits to reach even a decent, completed work. I don't think I can count how many times I started something new, immediately thought it sucked, and erased the whole thing. Not set it aside to look at again later. Erase it. In fact, I actually had a whole 100-page book completed when I was in 5th grade. And instead of setting it aside for another day, for a much more experienced me to just go back and revisit, I erased it. To this day, my mom is mad at me for that. Just remember, no story comes out perfect the first time around. Your main focus of your first draft is to complete it, to have something that you can work with. It's basically the skeleton of your novel. It takes several rounds of edits, critiques, and more edits to add the meat and the skin to your story. Number 2. This was pounded into my head by one of my creative writing teachers. Treat your audience like they're smart. And trust me, I know that there's a lot of idiots out there. But you don't want to write for idiots, do you? Basically, this means that there's no need to explain everything. Granted, you don't want to utterly confuse your audience for your entire story, but there are some things that they should be able to figure out for themselves. Frankly, I see this the most ignored in movies, and this is something to go on a list for another time, but one of my pet peeves of storytelling is opening narration in a movie. It's a visual medium. Don't talk at me. Don't make me read words on the screen. Just set your characters up in a situation and I'll figure it out from there. I mean, if I'm really so confused within the first 3 minutes of your movie, you've got a serious issue. Now, my number 2 kind of moves me into my number 3. Make your reader ask questions. So again, you don't want to over-explain things. Right from the beginning of your story, you want your audience to be asking questions. And you want to be answering those questions as the story moves along. Basically, if your audience is asking questions, then their interest is piqued. But if none of those questions get answered, that's where the confusion comes in. And now I have my lights on. I always forget that. Moving on to number 4. Said is not dead. Please don't say said is dead. Not just for your reader's sake, but for yours. You know when you're younger and you're told that the word said is completely overused and you should search for different words? Yeah, that's a load of crap. The thing about said is that it's an invisible word. We don't really think about it when we're reading, we kind of glance over it. What it does is serve the purpose of telling us who's speaking at the time. And a lot of the time, that's all we really need to know. Not everything is a hiss, or a grumble, or a shout, or a whisper. Sometimes people are just speaking. Actually, a lot of times people are just speaking. And another cool thing about the word said is that it can also serve as a pause. If you have 2 characters speaking with each other and one of them has a slight hesitation beforehand or doesn't answer right away, just throw the words they said in there. It's a good excuse to not have to use the actual words she paused or he hesitated. Someone could start speaking and instead of saying he hesitated, you can just say he said, and then continue with the dialogue. And then a hesitation is kind of implied. Seriously, there are only so many other words you can use. Just use said. And number 5 Use the 5 senses. If you're in the middle of a scene and you're having trouble kind of setting up the atmosphere, always go back to the 5 senses. Not only what your characters are seeing and hearing. Are there any particular smells in that scene? Is there freshly cut grass? Or is there rotting corpses? What are they feeling? Is there a cool breeze on their face? Is there a salty sea spray? Or is it too dang hot? And I know this one's not quite so easy to get in there, unless your characters are having dinner or something. But what are they tasting? Have they opened up a nice bottle of wine? Are they serving broccoli? Utilizing the 5 senses within a scene is always a good way to provide some more atmosphere. Number 6. This was also something I picked up from one of my writing professors. If you have several characters in a scene, and one of them barely says anything, get rid of them. Give another character their lines. In other words, sometimes you just have to drop or combine characters in order to clear up a scene. If you've got a character in there that's not serving a purpose, then don't put them there. It's as easy as that. Number 7. This is something I've eventually heard other writers talk about, but I actually did it on my own when I was just starting out. Just write the dialogue first. Sometimes when you're setting up a scene, particularly one in which characters are having a long, drawn-out discussion, your focus really needs to be on the dialogue. So write it on its own. That way you can focus on what's being said and what needs to be said, instead of worrying about where your characters are standing at that point, or what's going on in the background. And number 8, and this is the one I remembered this morning, and it's actually something I was told by writer Terry Farley when I had the pleasure of getting to meet her during a signing at Borders. Does anyone still remember Borders? That probably shows you how long ago that was. But see, she signed it. You're reading rocks. Anyway, I was young and more courageous at the time, so I actually went up to her and asked if there was anything she ever did to combat writer's block. And she told me that if you're having trouble figuring out where to go, you gotta ask yourself, what is the worst possible thing that can happen to your characters right now? That's the kind of advice that just makes you go, oh. And frankly, this is probably the best writing advice I've ever received, because it's a really good way to look at things. From my experience, I usually find myself in a lull when nothing's really happening, when I'm focusing too much on the inner conflict, or else I just don't really know of something my characters can be doing in that moment. So I stop and think to myself, how can I really screw up their lives right now? And bam! Inspiration. Anyway, those are just some little bits of writing advice that I personally have found extra useful over the course of my writing journey. Night owls, what are some bits of writing advice that have helped you improve your work? Feel free to chat about it below. And thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out our website at nocturnalmind.net, and we'll see you next time. Cheers!